Well, and hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Construx Thinking Aloud webinar series. I'm Mark Griffin, the host of the Construx Inspect and Adapt podcast, and your host for this morning's webinar titled 4 Reasons Why Requirements Are Hard. And this is going to be featuring Construx Technical Service Provider and CTO Earl Beede. Today, Earl is going to share his insights into decades of his work in the requirement space, including some tips on how to make requirements less hard on us, because let's face it, they are.
Yeah.
So Earl, you and I have been colleagues for almost 16 years. At what point does this get old for you? I mean, you've been at this a long time, right?
That's the beauty, because one of the reasons we'll see why requirements are hard is it's a human issue more than it is a technical issue half the time. And so working with humans is always fascinating. And so we just find new ways to try to interact with them and see how you can get them to take one step better. So there's always something new when working with humans, but there's a lot of old stuff too.
By way of intro, for those of you who don't know Earl, and that's probably a small population these days, Earl is a CSDP, he's Construx's CTO, and he's a Senior Fellow here at Construx. He has many years' experience as a manager, as a systems analyst, as a QA representative, a process architect, and more recently with Construx as a consultant. He's designed and implemented improved software practices for companies and industries, including telecom, computer hardware and software, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, oil and gas, retail, and many others. And here at Construx, Earl also designs and leads seminars and provides consulting services on Agile methods, on early project lifecycle practices, on estimation, requirements, QA, contract management, and software methodologies. And as a bit of a trivia, he used to raise chickens in his spare time.
All right. You're just saying, Mark, that I'm old. That's wow. All you're doing.
You're seasoned. You're
seasoned. Seasoned. All right. Well, thank you, Mark.
All right.
Well, welcome everyone. Sir. Okay, let's do it. Well, welcome everyone from me. I'm Earl, and what am I going to be thinking about in this Thinking About series this time? So I'm thinking about the 4 reasons why requirements are hard. And I think one of the reasons why requirements are hard is requirements involve people. And I was mentioning that in our little dialogue at the beginning, Mark, that human beings are messy and they're complicated and all that kind of stuff. And so how do we deal with that? I'm also thinking about requirements definitions, what people define requirements, how we even define what a requirement is not typically very helpful. We've had these definitions for years, and there's still a lot of people confused about what requirements are. And also, requirements are contextual. And this is one of the things that really gets most people. They're not cold, hard facts that just lie around. It depends. And this is where a lot of people get tripped up. And so we're going to look at that problem as well. And also, requirements have lots of parts to them. And this is something that's maybe unique to Earl even, but I think requirements have multiple parts and we leave a lot of them out. So that's what I'm going to be thinking about aloud with you today. And so go ahead and feel free to ask questions as we go on. Because again, our today's tech, you have that little question button there. It looks kind of like that little circle, dialogue with a question mark in it. You can give me some feedback if we're going. There's some feedback tools in here. We are recording the talk. And if you don't see the entire thing, like include that little constructs way down in the corner there, that you can use the fit to frame option to give you the full 16:9 if you're getting a 4:3 kind of image. Now I turned on some things that should allow you to get 16:9, but that's how it works. So let's get into it. All right. The first reason why requirements are hard is that requirements involve people. And a lot of people forget about this because in a sense, requirements are really not about saying, here's a cold, hard fact, but how do I get information out of one head into someone else's head in a complicated human being? In fact, if we kind of look at it, here are 2 people that need to communicate something. Our young man here on the right, actually on the left, a young man here on the left, he's looking and says, I have a problem. Now, his real problem, if he thinks about it hard, is that he needs to keep 2 pieces of paper together so they don't get separated. It's a legal document, and he needs to keep the papers together to be a complete document. But when he starts thinking about it, what he thinks is, I need glue. Now, we see a couple issues with this right away. One issue is this mess human being is thinking in terms of solutions. He's not thinking about his problem necessarily. I need to keep these pieces of paper together and what all the things I do with the paper. He just thinks, oh, I need some glue. This will keep paper together. But now not only does he think this, these are just thought bubbles. He has to give it to the young lady on the right, who's actually going to do something to help him. And what they teach you in Communications 101, basic communication, is that message received never quite equals message sent. That is, what they hear is not quite what you said. Because there's lots of reasons, including noisy transmission and picking of words and all kinds of stuff. And so what they teach you in Communications 101 is that to actually truly understand what the other person's trying to say, you have to do some sort of feedback. You have to say, oh, what I hear you saying is, and then you feedback and they go, well, that's not quite what I meant. What I mean was, and you go through it and you iterate back and forth between these two people multiple times, right? That's how you get this kind of thing to work. That's Communication 101. And so we're seeing a couple issues with this, just with messy human beings. One is that they're doing solution thinking. I think this is the natural state for most human beings. They like to think in terms of solution. Humans like physical, concrete things. They like to talk about things that they're going to do. When we think about my problems, my needs, or opportunities, that's an abstract thought. That's something I have to step back and start saying, what's really going on here? And to think about what I get rewarded for every day is not thinking about and going, what is the essence of my nature here? What I get paid to do is to solve problems. So I keep thinking about solutions. I am a human being. I think about solutions. So the first thing you're going to hear from any requirements requester, stakeholder, consumer, something like that, is a solution. They're not going to tell you the problem. They're going to say, you know what? We want a new field on this report. We need a new update to the UI. We need you to send it over in this format. They're going to give you a solution. That's just how they tend to work. This is how human beings think. And what I have kind of found in part of that being old and well-seasoned, as Mark mentioned, is that most non-designers turn out not to be very good designers. That is, they're not the best at doing the design, particularly in the technology that you're trying to implement. They're not the best designers. And so what happens when we take their verbiage, their requirement, that isn't a very good design and try to implement that, we start discovering that that wasn't the right thing to build. And so these messy human beings have given us really poor designs. I was once working with a company in California, and one of their VPs of marketing, obviously a stakeholder of the overall product, was actually a brilliant UI designer. They had immensely great design skills. And so when they worked on the project, the UI was beautiful. It was wonderful. However, people who worked for the VP, other people in marketing saw, oh, our VP, he does the UI, so we should do the UI too. And they were horrid, and they were causing the company tons of pain and suffering. And so one of the things I told them was, get this guy, this VP, out of marketing, put him in a special role as UI guru or something like that, and tell marketing people, stop being designers. You are no good at it. Yes, you had one person who had the skill, but the rest of you, no. And so we got to be careful here, because if we're taking the solution thinking and trying to say this is required, are we really getting the best design? And then there's, how much do I need to say? How much detail do I need to put into this comment, given that I'm talking to other human beings? And I think there's two sort of dimensions of this. One dimension on this is, the more of this I have, the less detail I need. And this is around areas of competency, how technically competent I am and how much I understand about the business domain that I'm working on. Because if I understand the business, I understand the solution, you can grunt at me, go, that doesn't look right. And I will go, yeah, you're probably right. And I'll do the right thing because I have high competency. I see this in organizations like initial startups sometimes, where they've been building it together for 2 or 3 years. They've worked well together. They can just sort of look at each other and figure out what to do and build it right. But you start taking that same team and start bringing in new people, you start bringing in outside vendors, and they try to do the same thing, and it falls apart because the detail's wrong, because they no longer have the competency. The other side of this says, the more of this I have, the more detail I need. And these are things like how critical the requirements is, legal, regulatory, the team size. You tend to have a lot more detail because not everyone's going to have that same level of competency. And also any kind of distance, either it's physical distance or even time distance where someone's going to be reading in the future, or even sometimes cultural differences. Distance really starts driving up the need for more detail. I was seeing this with a client that was working in Arizona and was outsourcing it to the Ukraine. And they were sending them over lots of stuff, but they weren't sending them much detail. They were just sending them base requirements. And I said, look, you've got too much distance here. You're going to have to give them more context, more detail, more understanding of how this thing is working before they start getting working software. So these two things start driving some of the craziness too with humans because they all don't need the same amount of detail. Different people need different amount of details, and you have to fine tune this over time. And then we've got another big problem, is that we tend to try to do all this in a natural language. Natural language being the kind of language you use every day to talk to other people. Because natural language has some issues with it. Its biggest issue is it tends to be verbose. It tends to use lots and lots of words and have lots of imprecision in it. That is, words can mean multiple different things. I just saw yesterday that the word bank in English, B-A-N-K, has at least 10 different nouns and about another few verb meanings, all in one word. Completely different, like go to a bank or a bank of a stream, right? It just gets confusing. And so natural language has this problem. Now, a lot of people have tried to address this by coming up with more precise language. My co-patriot out there, Tom Gilb, uses Planguage, where he has a very defined language to try to deal with this natural language problem. We also see things like models to try to deal with this. But most people are using a natural language, and that is verbose and precise. And so when they try to write in that natural language, we tend to get vague, ambiguous, and requirements that are incomplete because natural language also assumes a common understanding, and that detail is often missing. So this is an issue with natural language. So what do we do about that? Well, I think the tip here to try to make this human aspect of it a little bit less crazy for you is to plan to iterate. We saw in Communication 101 that we need to do the feedback loop to truly understand someone. So there's going to be some sort of iteration where you're going to say, here, give it to me, and I get it back. And so plan to do that. Start to set yourself up to say, I'm going to iterate so we can learn what we're trying to really say. And we need to learn both for the development teams, the people building it, but also the stakeholders. Because remember, they're coming into you with solution thinking. And so they need someone to help iterate, think through that problem so they really understand the problem. So when they do get a design, it actually solves the real problem, not the one they were thinking they were solving when they came up with their probably inferior design. So where are you going to do this? And our methodologies really have given us two places typically to where we can iterate and learn. If you think of the more waterfall sequential processes, they really want to iterate and learn early via modeling. This is where we're going to use the precise languages of UML modeling tools and stuff like that to help really drive that down. Maybe my co-patriot again, Tom Gilb out there, I think he might be listening, could also do that with Planguage as well, because it is a constrained language that helps you, forces you through thinking this more out clearly. So that's certainly one place we could iterate to learn, but you have to plan that in. You cannot just say, oh, we're going to do a bunch of requirements and stop. You're going to have iteration there where you go feeding back and actually have something that forces people to think through this problem. And more agile methodologies, they want to iterate and learn through working software. They're going to say, you know what? Our requirements are going to be crap, but we're going to build small amounts and show it to you, and you're going to realize, wow, this is really bad. This is not what I wanted at all. And we'll go, great. Now that you've seen that what your design idea, your solution idea isn't working, what is it you really want? And that will be another way to iterate, but you got to plan to iterate. Even a lot of my agile teams don't have that iteration plan built in. They just think, oh, we're going to build it faster because we'll build it in these small increments and it will work every time. Not expecting you're going to have to go back and rebuild it 2-3 times because that's how we're going to learn. Okay. So the tip here is start to plan to iterate. The second big problem I see on requirements, why requirements aren't hard, is that how we even define requirements is not very helpful. I see lots of definitions like this one over here that says good requirements are well written. Well, yeah, Duh. All right. They don't have ambiguity. Okay. Right? How is that being helpful? How do I say to someone, oh, your requirements are too ambiguous? Well, I think they're just fine. Again, we're back to that detail problem. What's detail for me is not detail for you. This is not very helpful. So if you look at, say, an official definition here, that's a lot of text there, right? We've had this around for ages. How has it really helped us get better? It's often like I joke about technical help for, say, Microsoft or someone, right? So you get technical help like this. It's like, it's technically correct, but practically not very helpful. A condition or capability needed by a user to solve a problem or achieve an objective. Well, yeah, that's true. But is it helpful, right? Does it help you to look at a statement and say, yes, that is a requirement, and no, it is not? I don't think so, right? It hasn't helped lots of organizations I work with. And that's the official definition. A lot of people don't even know that. They go with the more common definition out there. The requirements are about the what, not the how. And this has been completely unhelpful for me for the most part, right? Because if I remember once someone was coming in and said they wanted to run in a certain browser. And I said, well, that's really a how, right? Because that you want to get out there. The real problem is you want to actually sure everyone can use it. Selecting the browser is just a technology of the day. That's a how. And he looked at me and says, Earl, you don't understand. That's what I want. That's exactly what I want, right? What versus how is not a very helpful distinction. It doesn't help people look at something and tell what it really is. And then you got all these things, right? Functional requirements, business requirements, all these different kinds of requirements people talk about. And how do you even define those? We can't even define requirement very well. How do you define all these subtypes or types of requirements? I remember talking to one of the gurus who promotes these kinds of things. I said, okay, let's take a business requirements. If I'm just looking at a statement, how do I teach someone that that's a business requirement? How can they look at it and say, it's a business requirement? And they basically gave me the definition of the Supreme Court once ruled for pornography. I know it when I see it. I can't teach that. I can't help people start saying, here's how you tell what these are by the content in them, by looking at them, whether a business requirement, a user, a system, or a marketing requirement, or a product spec, or something like that. How do you tell? It's really, really hard because we're using natural language and we've got all these humans in here. And the definition isn't helping you separate things out very well. Yeah, in hindsight, we might be able to say, well, that was a user requirement. But how do you tell when it's happening? I can't give anyone good teaching on how that happens, except you know it when you see it. So maybe a tip here is to come up with a less official, less correct definition, but a more helpful definition. And the helpful definition I tend to use is requirement is a decision we impose on the implementation. That is, I decide that when we build it, it has to do it this way. Whether that decision is what color it has to be or what problems it has to solve, it's a decision that someone's making saying, when we build it, it has to be this way. And I think that's the way we use the word requirement in everyday life. When my children were younger and at home and they would say, Dad, can I borrow the car? I could say, sure, you can, if you return it full of fuel. Right? I made a requirement that said, if you want to use the car, you have to meet this need or this decision I made. Fair enough. And you might also look at this as a requirement is a rule that the next line must follow. Basically the same thing, but sometimes a rule the next line might follow might be a little bit simpler. When the next people do their job, they have to follow this rule that we made up. We decided about this rule. And I think this is a far more helpful definition. Because if you start using this definition of a requirement as decisions we impose on the implementation, you can start asking all those great questions. You can start looking at decisions and say, who is making this decision? Are they the right person to make this decision? Do they have the skills and knowledge to make this decision well? Like I said in my story about the VP who was a UI guru, they were the right person to make UI decisions. But the marketing people that worked for him were not. They didn't have the skills and knowledge to make good UI decisions, and so they were really awful. Does the person who's making this decision the right person to make this decision? Or is it just input into the right person who makes the decision? What are they actually deciding about? Are they deciding about what problems we need to solve? They actually know needs? Are they making decisions about solutions? Are they deciding in a way that's consistent with other decisions that we've made? What are they actually deciding about? What's the scope of the decision? We'll see more about that in a second. When do we need to make this decision? Does this decision need to be made right now? Or are we making this decision way too early because we still need to learn things that might inform this decision? Right? Is this the right time to make decision? I love how Agile talks about the last responsible moment. To me, that makes a lot of sense. It's not the last moment, it's the last responsible moment. That's when we want to make a decision because we have as much information we're going to get and we need to make it to inform the next in line kind of thing. That's that rule for the next line because the next in line needs a decision in order to do it. We can even ask why. Why are we making this decision? Are we making this decision because we actually have to write code? Or are we making this decision because we want to get a sense of how big this project is? That talks about different levels and different kinds of requirements potentially. Why do we need to make this decision now? Right? Do we have enough of this content to actually proceed for the next in line to do their job? So once you start seeing as requirements a decision, you can start seeing this as a decision-making process, and you start asking good questions about who's making what decisions. And I think we make all kinds of decisions. First of all, I think we make decisions on what kind of problems do we actually want to solve. And I think we can make decisions at different scopes. We can make decisions that affect everything our organization is doing, which I call this sort of mission level decision up here, right? Decisions that impact an entire organization. Or we can take a step down and say, hey, this decision doesn't affect the organization, but it affects one goal. Let's take a bank, for example. Our mission is to help customers organize, manage money, sell investments. We have a big mission. But one job is to help you manage your money. Right? That might be a job goal. In fact, as a consumer, one of my goals is I want to manage my money. That's a job or goal that I have. One workflow in that might be to the sense of, oh, I wanted to deposit money. I want to withdraw money. It's a different workflow, right? Things I want to do to help manage my money. A course or path might be, hey, I want to deposit money into checking. I want to deposit money into savings. Different courses that all about the workflow deposit money. And one step might be to authenticate myself. I have to make decisions about all this. And when do I want to work on them? When do I want to implement them? When do I want to solve them? What's in scope and out of scope? We have to make lots of decisions about what problem we want to solve. And so when someone says the what, requirements are the what, not the how, I think that's actually an incomplete sentence. I think a better sentence is requirements about what problems do we want to solve. And I think there's lots of decisions too about how to solve a problem. We need to make decisions about what technologies we're going to use and what systems we want to build and how we're going to divide that into areas of subsystems or components, and finally all the way down to the unit level. We have to make lots and lots of decisions on how to solve the problem. And again, this is what I think of as the how, as a shortened version of what decisions we have to make to solve the problem. So if you start seeing the world as a decision-making process, we can start talking about different kinds of decisions that make sense. I can teach people about, hey, this decision seems to be about a problem and it has this kind of scope. People go, I see that, and I can start pointing out different kinds of decisions and they can name those and categorize them too. So tip here, think about a simpler definition, decisions that we impose on the implementation. What it doesn't do, though, is you can see that I have decisions both about what problems to solve and what decision on how to solve them. So I got to figure out a different way to solve that problem about between requirements and design. Which brings me to the fourth problem. Requirements are contextual. And I sort of suggest here that as we look at them, what I think it might be a requirement, someone else might say that's clearly a design. I love to point out from the story, Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that the Earth and everything we know about is design, is a solution to the problem. What is the question whose answer is 42? If you're a Douglas Adams fan, you would know that came from the maximum computer who said the answer, ultimate answer, everything is 42. And then one said, great, what was the question? Not what Earth was built to answer that problem. What was the question whose answer is 42? And unfortunately, Earth got destroyed right before it was about to report out to make room for a galactic highway. But it's contextual now. You can see that even if everything we know is design, that says that there are no requirements, there's no problem to solve from Douglas Adams' point of view. So how we deal with this? Well, we've often used the term in the world of requirements of spaces, and we can see these two different kinds of problems we want to solve: the requirement problem space and the solution space. And in those two spaces, we have those different scopes of decisions. And you see, I talk here about a wide decision scope, a medium decision scope, down to a very narrow decision scope. And this is something that I think is really missing in the world, is that I think the difference between what people call high-level requirements and low-level requirements does not have to do how vague it is. A difference between high-level requirements and low-level requirements is the scope of the decision. High-level requirements affect a very wide scope, maybe the entire product, maybe the entire organization, whereas low-level requirements have a very narrow scope, only affecting one routine or one particular function. And so the scope of the decision determines whether it's high or low, not how vague it is. I think wide decision scope decisions, our high-level requirements, should be just as measurable and testable and unambiguous as any other requirement. They're all decisions, and all decisions need to be made well. So how do we deal with this idea of spaces? Because this idea that requirements are contextual. Well, what we see is that when you think about these spaces, is that it all comes down to what you've been asked to build. So the world sort of takes a focus of saying, you've been asked to build something. And this thing that you're building has interactions with things outside of it. Other consumers, people who are actually using it to get their job done. There's stakeholders who want things out of it, like a certain return on investment or compliance. And there's other systems you might have to interact with, and you might just be one component in a bigger system, then you have to talk to the other components. But the question starts down saying, what have you been asked to build? Because this is how we determine the spaces. The spaces that are outside this red box, right? Outside the box below is your problem or opportunity space. I like talking about opportunity space because it seems so much more positive than problem space. But traditionally the name has been problem space. But outside the box is what we call the problem space. But the box is the box that you do, saying, what have you been asked to build? Inside the box is what we would call the solution space. Now, this has particular ramifications because classically, when we think about requirements versus design, requirements have been on those interactions saying, hey, I need the thing that you're building to do this for me. Okay? Not how you build it, but I need whatever you build to do this for me. Requirements traditionally are on that interaction. Every decision inside the box, every decision inside this red box here is typically called design, right? How do we design something? And again, Douglas Adams, in his red box, that the earth is the solution or the thing we're going to build to solve the problem. What's the question? Whose answer is 42? Everything is design then, because everything's inside the box of the earth. But we tipped out to build this. So if I'm building a banking system, the banking system is the box. If I'm building a component in a large system, the component is the box. But you have to know your box to get your spaces, and then you have to get your spaces to know what your requirements are and your design are. Your problem decisions versus your solutions decisions. And it's really as straightforward as that, except it can get really crazy. For example, here is a bunch of stakeholders and they have needs. We need shelter, we need food, we need puppies, whatever their needs are. And the first thing you have to decide is, out of all those needs, which ones are you choosing to solve? That's a decision we have to make. Our solution will provide shelter. We're going to solve the shelter need. And we have a technology called a house that we're going to use to solve it. There you go. Our red box is a house. That's our boundary. So how people want to interact with our house, how regulators want to interact with our house, that's what we're going to have to be looking for requirements. And decisions inside our box, like we're going to use 2x4s at 6-foot intervals, that's clearly a solution decision, right? That's inside our box. How we choose to build our house is inside our box. Now, if any of you have construction experience, you probably know that's a crappy floor, right? 2x4s at 6-foot interval, it's going to go boing, boing, boing. It's not going to be able to bear a ton of weight. It's not a great floor, but sure, it's a floor, it works. But let's just play, right now, our box is this house. But let's play this scenario. Let's say that, hey, we're going to subcontract out the fireplace. We're going to go to a mason and say, we want a stone fireplace. We want you to build the fireplace. What just happened to that decision to use 2x4s at 6-foot intervals? To the mason who has a different box, that same statement became a requirement. It became a part of their problem space because their solution space is only the orange box, the smaller box in there, not the big box. And so that exact same decision, which was clearly a solution to the house, is now a requirement to the mason who's building the fireplace. And this is what drives a lot of great requirements people into bad habits like alcoholism, because individual decisions are space agnostic. They don't care. They're just decisions that people are making. What makes them a requirement or a design in the problem space or the solution space is not the decision itself. It's the boundary of your product, what you've been asked to build. Are we making decisions about how you're going to build it, or are we going to make decisions about what problems you're trying to solve with what you're building? Right? The boundary of your product. And so whenever I go into any organization, the first thing I have to say, if they say, hey, Earl, what is our requirements? Are they any good? I have to say, we got to talk about what the boundary is. I can't even talk to you intelligently whether these decisions are inside or outside or requirements or design until I know what boundary you're trying to use so I can draw that line. And that's often not an easy question for them to answer initially because no one's ever thought about it. So here's the tip for helping this one. Draw your context. That's what I almost get any organization to do. 2 tips here, actually. Draw your context out. Just put your boundary in the middle, and then start saying who's interacting with it or what's interacting with it. All these different consumers out here who are interacting with it, and what do they need the thing I'm building to do? And then do this. Pretend that your technology isn't the microservices or the 3-tier architecture or whatever the heck it is. Pretend that you have Magic Garden Gnome technology. Magic Garden Gnomes can do anything, but what the heck do you need them to do? So if someone says, hey, our Magic Garden Gnomes need to use this particular regulatory standard, you could say, no, they don't. They're Magic Garden Gnomes. You're making a solution decision. Now, that might be a great solution decision to use that regulatory standard, but why do we want to use it? Well, we want to go to that market. We want to make sure that we can sell in that market. That's the problem we're trying to solve. If we don't want to go to that market, we don't need to use your standard. Thank you very much, right? So think about if you had Magic Garden Gnome technology. If you had that technology, what would still be at your boundaries that you needed the Magic Garden Gnomes to do for you? And that's a good way to start separating out what the context is so you can understand what is requirements and what is design. And you can be more certain that you're actually making sure clear your problem decisions are well specified and not just your solution decisions. And the last thing I cited to make requirements hard, because I wanted to limit myself to just 4 so I could do this in 45 minutes or less, right? Because I could probably come up with like dozens. But the 4th one I said is requirements have multiple parts. And I actually claim they have 3 parts to a good requirement. And when I say requirement now, I'm saying a decision that we impose on the implementation. Not individual statements that somebody wrote up in a book, but what makes a good decision that we want to impose and implement? What are the 3 parts that I need? And the 3 parts I think I need are a context, a function, and some acceptance criteria. Now, I've used the Agile looking of this thing, but you could do the same exact 3 things happen in more the system shell kind of requirements. They're exact same things they have to bear: the context, a function, and the acceptance criteria. And when I say acceptance criteria here, I'm really meaning what most people might call traditionally non-functional requirements. I think the word non-functional is the most stupidest name we ever came up with, because basically you looked at the function here and said, it's not the function, so what do we call it? Well, we'll call it not the function, non-functional. Nuts, right? I think the term acceptance criteria, because what you're basically saying is when I do this function, how do I do this function in an acceptable way? What criteria am I going to come up with that says this is an acceptable way to do this function? One of my favorite examples is making toast. I love toast. I love nice buttered toast. But if you say, yes, we're going to make a beautiful brown piece of bread that's perfectly toasted and nice and warm, but we're going to take 3 hours to do it, I'm going to say, don't care, right? You did the function, you made toast, but taking 3 hours is not acceptable. I need toast if I'm hungry in the morning in less than 5 minutes, not 3 hours. That's not acceptable. So that criterion, time, I have a range of values that I find acceptable, and beyond that, you haven't really met my need, right? So a context, who am I? What am I doing? I'm in the morning, I'm hungry, I'm trying to get my toast. Make toast, do it in acceptable criterion. These are the three parts that we need. But when I go out to client shops and I look what they're actually doing, I only see one part, right? Almost always I see two parts are missing entirely. The context is missing and the acceptance criteria are missing. That they're just not being captured. They sometimes think that if I just write this in Agile would be a user story as I can, we're golden. And it's, no, you have not made a complete decision. I can implement that function and do it in a way that you totally hate because I didn't understand the context you were trying to use it in, and I didn't understand the criteria by which you judged it by, whether you're going to judge it acceptable or not. I had no clue. We never talked about it. It was totally missing. And I think acceptance criteria in particular are in complete crisis right now. This idea of how do we actually do them? Because I don't think anyone really grasps what acceptance criteria really should be. Often what I see when people write acceptance criteria, if they write it at all, right? Often what I see is that it's just more functions. What they've done is said something like, oh, you want to make toast. What are the acceptance criteria for make toast? Oh, the acceptance criteria is I can insert bread, heat bread, and remove bread. That's just more function. That's just saying make toast in more words. It's being more verbose about it. Yes, those might be important steps, but that's how I decompose that function into sub-functions to make it fit into a sprint or something like that. It's not a criteria that says when I make toast, what makes toast acceptable? How long I need to make toast? How brown, evenly brown it is. That's acceptance criteria, not the steps of how I make toast. And that's even if I even have it. Often they're just blank in there. Even though the tools like Jira and Azure DevOps have a little field down there, there's nothing in there. But if there is something, it's often just more functions labeled incorrectly. Also, I see that acceptance criteria, what's really cool is that they're inherited. And I don't see the inheritance going on. I don't people's understanding from the top level. Here's our overall acceptance criteria, and here's how it impacts my decisions down below. And again, it's mostly poor inheritance of higher level acceptance criteria because they're mostly just not there. No one's capturing them at the high level. And this is where decisions at the top are really, really lacking. They're missing the acceptance criteria. When I go into a shop and help them figure out how to do requirements better, I focus at the top of the stack, the few handful of requirements that they need to make really, really well, make these decisions well, so they have both the function and the acceptance criteria, because once you get them really well at the top, they tend to flow their way down. And the other thing that makes acceptance criteria such a crisis is that these attributes, how fast the toaster is going to work, how brown it evenly it is, all these kinds of things are things that have to be designed in. You cannot just code them in later. That doesn't work. You can't code, make a whole bunch of product and say, okay, now let's make it safe. Now let's make it secure. No, that has to be design artifacts. And so if you're not getting these until late in the game, discovering them too late, you often have to do massive redesign. This is one of the reasons why Agile isn't working out for a lot of organizations as well as they like, because they think incremental development solves the problem, and they're not doing the feedback loop saying, did we get acceptance criteria correct? Because if we didn't, we don't want to have to wait till the very end to do a massive redesign when we discover it. We have to make these first increments completely acceptable as is, and they don't even know what they are. So I think we're in a crisis there. So how do we do this? What would be a simplifying tip to help deal with this crisis of acceptance criteria to make sure that we have all three parts? And unfortunately, this section is sadly left blank. I don't know if there is a simplifying tip, the way to say, unlike the other ones where I can say, maybe take a step forward, do it, because we haven't developed as an industry a lot of tools to help us deal with acceptance criteria. In fact, one of the only tools that we really have in the book is ISO 25010. It says, hey, when you see a function like make toast, take a look at this list here. And what jumps out of you that your customer, your consumer, is going to judge you by to say you are acceptable, right? And we talked about time behavior. You can see time behavior on here. Certainly could be one thing that we're being judged acceptable on. It could be a resource utilization. How much power do you have to draw to do this, right? That could be something they're going to judge us on. But what is it they're going to judge us on when we make toast? We got a list here. We can start taking guesses and stabbing in the dark. Now, one of the nice things is that everything on this list is there, right? All these things are acceptance criteria for any given function. They all exist. But the other good news is that only few are going to be the ones they're going to be judging us on. What if you get into one of my more detailed discussions, I'll talk about as value plus, right? They're going to make positive value judgments if we nail these things down. Most of these things are what I call negative value. That is, they'll make negative value judgments only if we screw them up. They won't make positive value judgments if we do really well on them, but if we mess them up, they'll make negative value judgments. And so most of these are negative value judgments. A few don't have any impact whatsoever, but only a handful tend to be my positive. That is, they're really watching this. As long as you don't screw up the rest, they're really watching to say, did you do this right? So part of our job is to help figure out what that is. So maybe there is one tip I could come up with, and this is to turn many Agile implementations around, and even some of my sequential applications, is to tell the story. Now, notice the flow here I have going on here. We have the little function description, the acceptance criteria. I even have acceptance criteria, but I have the PO then telling the story, the bigger picture. Because when you tell the story, those acceptance criteria often will start to flow out a little bit more. It's not a great tip, but if you start looking at this as conversation, not I'm writing you stuff down and handing it to you, which is what we tend to want to do with requirements, but requirements as a placeholder for a conversation, they say in the Agile world, but something that says, I'm going to have human conversations about this, because human conversations, if we go interacting back and forth, if I try to tell the complete story of how this is being used in any given situation, I'm more likely to bring up some of those acceptance criteria and a lot of that context that's missing. If I think I'm just going to write this down and hand it off to someone, I'm going to be more in trouble. But if I think I have to explain it and have that conversation, that's going to facilitate more of that feedback and more of that ability to start saying, did I get this right? All right. So where have we been with my 4 problems and my simple tips? Well, here were the 4 problems, right? I think there's a people problem. I think there's the definitional problem. I think it's a contextual problem. And I think there's a multiple parts problem. So what were our tips to help you sort of deal with this going forward? I think one is that you have to plan to iterate. You need to have in your mind and in your schedule and in your activities a conscious and totally opaque, transparent, everyone can see it. We are going to iterate here. This is going to happen. There's not going to be one just like, well, we have a beautiful idea, we're going to implement it quickly. No, there will be iteration. Where do you plan to iterate? Because if you don't plan to iterate in the project itself, you will iterate at the end of the project doing rework and rework and rework and rework. It's going to happen. Might as well plan to do it. Then you start coming up with hopefully a more helpful definition of requirements. I use requirements are a decision to impose the implementation, because then I can start seeing all requirements work as a decision-making process. Who are my deciders? When do they need to decide? What scope are they deciding at? What are they actually deciding about? Are they deciding about what problems to solve or how to solve them? And I'm allowing anyone to make any kind of decision. I don't care. I just want to understand the content of what they're deciding. The decision allows me to look at requirements much more positively and much more completely. And for contextual, I said, start thinking about what is your product boundary, and maybe even using my magic garden gnome technology. Because once you start doing that, you can start saying, okay, what really needs to happen? I can then figure out my context. And then if I have to subdivide, those people can see their context. This is often an illuminating and empowering thing that you can take your group through to help them start saying, what is the boundary that we're actually talking about? And then, not great, but maybe just tell the story for multiple parts, because in telling the story, we're much more likely to be driving out some ambiguity and having a more rich conversation that's going to build in some of that iteration that we saw in the first step. So that's my answers. I am now ready for questions. 45 minutes in, that was my goal. Woohoo, look at that.
I'm impressed. Right on the button in 45 minutes. I don't know how you do that. That's pretty good, Earl. Thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I learned a lot. I'm in co-worker seat with you very often, and a lot of times I've heard some of these things, but there's some new stuff here today, and I really appreciate the opportunity to listen to them. So we have a number of questions that came in. One, I think, in terms of, I think this goes along the acceptance criteria one you just mentioned at the end of the talk. When you're doing waterfall requirements to iterate and learn via models, would you agree that you should work incrementally as well as iteratively? Writing one big requirements document in one go, then sending it over to your customer for overall feedback seems like madness to me, even when the business domain is quite well understood. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you need to iterate through models. When I talk about iteration, particularly through models, what I want to do is I want to have bits of multiple models going on at the same time. So I'll start with I like use cases, and then I'll have domain models, activity models, and then some state charts, right? And I'll build them up incrementally, right, back and forth, because they'll start forcing each other to ask questions about each one of them. So I want to build those up. What they'll do is, as I do it, I'll discover individual, because I'm doing waterfall, right? The system shall statements, right? Blah, 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 blah. I'll discover those kind of things as I go on. And I want to feed those incrementally into some review process like that. I don't want to show up with a big hunking document. I like to talk about the difference, especially in my waterfall ones, between what I call working space and repository. That big hunking document is going to be my repository, but I don't want it my working space. I don't want, that's the place where I'm getting the work done and moving things forward. I want to be in a working space because I want my working space to be fast and easy to change and dynamic. Well, my repository to be static and have change control and all that other kind of stuff, right? I want my repository to be the place where it lives when we're done, not the place we're getting the work done. So separating those two things out often helps here too in my waterfall world.
So follow on to that question, is there a best way to capture requirements? You talk about repository and for solidified things, but in a fluid space, what do you recommend?
With our distributed teams now, I'm using the online whiteboards and their modeling tools. I've been a customer of Miro. There's others out there, but I've been a customer of Miro, and I know they have a reasonably good set of objects in the UML space, so I can do my modeling on there. We can pull out requirements. I can create documents. I can attach them to that, so that I can actually have multiple people working together at the same time. Back when I used to do this in person, we would just get into rooms with whiteboards, right? And draw it up there. Projectors now, we would all be on screen and someone be drawing and on the modeling and make it work that way. iPads and other tablets with pens, way better than laptops for this kind of work, right? It's things that you can use dynamically to draw.
Right. Okay, makes sense. How do you deal with something like an industry standard? It doesn't seem like a decision, but it's something that's definitely required, right? When you're in those environments.
Right, so this is, whoops. I want to hit this button here, clear the page. What I do with industry standards is I say, okay, here's my box, right? Here's the thing I've been asked to build. The standard is sitting out here, right? Now I look at, say, okay, what is this thing that standard wants me to do? So I look at the individual decision, blah, blah, blah. And I look at it and say, what is its content? Is the content telling me how to build something, or is it telling me why I want to build it? If it's decision content, if the content is solution, I say, great, you've made it a solution decision for me, but I label it a solution decision. Because remember, my decisions are equally binding. Decisions inside the box are just as binding as decisions outside the box. I just label it differently. I say, this standard has made these solution decisions on my behalf, and I'm going to be following them. Now, I would then say, okay, why are we actually following the standard? That might be a good question to talk to the business about. Are we following because we think we'll get more market share if we follow the standard? Are we going to be able to get to more markets if we follow the standard? Are we going to be able to pass and get certified more quickly if we follow the standard? Right? There has to be a reason why. And if those reasons why don't pan out, actually it's going to cost us more and we're not going to get any more sales because of it. Maybe we should just not follow the standard.
Right. Makes sense.
But we never analyze that nearly as much as we look at the solution. But say, hey, yeah, standards are making decisions that we impose the implementation. I'm just going to label them solution decisions and put them in my solution space.
Okay.
And again, they're just as binding.
Yeah. So another question. I see that everything that makes requirements complex is, in fact, a lack of knowledge of the problem domain. Having people who understand the problem domain and iterate with them is the way to develop software products. Do you agree?
I do. There you go. That was easy. Problems are, but the trick here is that I don't know if everyone is equally skilled at diving in to look at problems. This is one of the fascinating things for me, is that I keep thinking that everyone has the skill to be able to pull off multiple levels of abstractions, changing from problem solution space, being able to make those switches really quickly in their head. And I don't think that's true anymore. I think there's people who just have to live in the solution space. I think there's only a handful of people that are really good at doing this kind of thing. That's why modeling. I think modeling is wonderful. I think modeling is great. And I don't think the skill for modeling is universal. It's like the skill for writing great novels. Sure, everyone could write text down, but to write a really good book that people want to read, well, that's a different story.
That's true. I mean, your previous webinar you did recently that talked about the people issues associated with choosing agile versus waterfall practices, right? And the performance or the capability of the individuals made a profound difference on how your choice got made. And I guess you would say to some extent that's true here too, right?
Yeah. That's why I think Agile is reasonably better, because the ability to put actual working software in front of people and go, what do you think, is a lot wider skill band than saying I can actually iterate well in models. Yeah.
Right. I agree. How do you stop stakeholders from making decisions about the solution?
I don't. I actually, in my model, if you ever take a requirements course with me, I'll say, okay, we're going to start with a solution, because that's what they want to tell you. That's how they think. We're going to explore that a little bit. And then we're going to say, okay, we're going to ask a variation of the why question. Tell me, how's that making your life better? And I'm going to try to then go into the problem, right? Then I try to figure that out. And then I ask a variation of the who else, to understand any impact on other people. Because if that problem is true for you, is it true for other people as well? And I explore that. So this is a little model I take people through, but I start with the solution, because they want it to go. And if I tell them, no, that's a solution, you need to tell me about the problem, they're going to say, hey, Earl, up yours. Right? But if you listen to them and you say, okay, I understand the solution, tell me how that's going to make your life better. Tell me why this is going to make it so much better. What issues are this going to help solve? And then look around that problem. And that's the impact area. Look around that problem, see what else is kind of in that territory. They'll start going to the problem space themselves, because they'll start saying, oh yeah, you're right. And then probably the solution they came up with, they'll start going, maybe we need to do something a little different. And you're like, maybe we do. I've found that a dozen times. They start analyzing the real problem, and they start saying, oh, that solution is not going to work in these situations, is it? And I'm not going, probably not, but it's a good idea. We'll keep it in mind. Let's talk about the problem some more. And now they're willing to go there, because I help them get there instead of just saying, go there by yourself, because I don't think they know how. It's not a skill they've developed.
Right. Makes sense. Another question is, how do you remove ambiguity from requirements?
Acceptance criteria. To me, that's the key to all this. Because when you do acceptance criteria, what you're going to learn, and this is something I learned from Tom Gilb, is that you should have a scale for every one of these things. And on that scale is going to have different points on that scale. They're going to talk about how, like my toast, how fast do I want toast? And we start saying, oh, you want 30-second toast. Ooh, wait a minute. I don't have technology that does 30-second toast. Let's examine this a bit more, because when you start getting the scales and putting numbers on the scales, I find ambiguity just disappears, right? But when you have the function, the other issue is, of course, knowing the problem, as we said earlier. One of my favorite sayings I like to do in class is, when I don't understand the problem, every solution is equally valid.
Right. That's completely true. A couple more questions. Are user stories actually requirements? How do you look at user stories in context?
I did a webinar. I think it might have been on for a client, but I could say user stories can grow up to be requirements. All three parts are there. If you include the product owner telling the story, the context is there, the function is there, acceptance criteria can be, but we don't impose them until the end of sprint planning, right? They're not a decision that we impose in implementation until we accept them at the end of sprint planning. When they're just sitting in the backlog, they're just potential requirements. And they can have different degrees of things, but until we actually impose them, say we have decided to solve for this problem, Good to go. And user stories have been attempting to talk about the problem since the beginning. And all their attempts to come up with the as in, I can, so that is trying to get people to talk about the frickin' problem. And even then, it still doesn't work most of the time for most people because, again, we have humans and they're complicated and messy and don't really go into the problem space very well. Because if we did, most marriages would be much happier.
That's a bonus. That's a bonus giveaway
bonus tip
from Earl's talk today, right? So there you go. Let's see. We have a team of developers who know the legacy system. They are configuring the new system without formal requirements. As a business analyst, I have no visibility into how they're making decisions. So requirements documentation and testing prep are nearly impossible. I keep getting feedback that we're going to iterate on an as configured new solution and get feedback from the users. But as they do this, they're giving feedback directly to the developers. Have you seen this and any advice on untangling this? Well, that's a good one.
Wow, there's so much to that. And I would say call us and set up a chat with me because that's not really going to be a simple answer. But the short answer is it looks like they're taking the Agile idea of get working software out there and learn requirements and skip the entire front end, right? So when I had that picture of you could do it early and do it late, I like both. I'd rather do both. But in some Agile, you're only going to do the late one, and you won't have a requirements document. You won't have an Agile. There won't be an Agile requirement. And Denise, I saw your chat show up. Shout out Denise. I worked with her for a while. It's like good to hear you. Yeah. So you're not going to have a document per se. What you're going to have is a bunch of change requests. Right, that's going to be your formalization, and your testing is not going to be as nearly as good. I mean, you can have a unit test to make sure the units work, but you're going to have to invent these things on the fly. You're just going to hand it to them and say, "Show me how you do your job." Now, the trick here is when they say, "Show me how to do it all," start watching how they actually try to use whatever you're doing, because they're going to try to do their job. They're going to try to use your product. They'll be that consumer on the outside and use it going on. You might want to start even a separate conversation with them, saying, "Okay, I got magic gnome technology now. What do you need it to do?" Right? Then you don't have to worry about what the developers are developing because you have magic gnome technology. You can learn in parallel with them. Might be another way to help drive that conversation.
Okay. Last comment, last question. I think we're a couple minutes before the top of the hour. Any book recommendations you can share for some of the things you covered today?
So the two books that I tend to recommend these days, I'm involved now in trying to give comments on a brand new book being written. So I don't know. We're only on the third chapter so far. But the two books I currently think is Mastering the Requirements Process by Suzanne and James Robertson, third edition. And I recommend that one because my name's in it 4 times, spelled correctly 3 times. So gotta love that.
Pronouncing correctly 4 times.
Yeah, and then if you want to delve in, Tom, I know you're probably listening. I don't think you're the easiest person to read, but your value requirements handbook it really shows you how to set the scales and set numbers on the scales. He's going to use that language thing that he does, which has that more formalized language, not a natural language, but a more formalized, defined language to help solve that problem. That's another book that's worth poking your head into and trying to get around a little bit.
Awesome. Well, I think we're just about at the top of the hour. We're about 1 minute away. I think we're going to call that a wrap, if that's okay with you, Earl.
Yeah, and if you want to contact Construx or me personally, it's earl.beede@construx.com, or you can just do hello@construx.com. You can reach out, and I'd be happy to have a little chat with you as well if there's something that's really bugging you, a question you can answer today. That's just part of what we do here is we try to help promote better software development. If it goes into hours and hours, we might talk about some money exchange. But if it's a half-hour chat, I'm certainly have often time to do that. So drop us a line, give us a call, and we could probably help you out there.
So one more question somebody asked is, will you make the slides available?
Well, we're going to put it up on the YouTube channel. If someone really needs a slide, again, drop us a line and I'll send you. We don't like to send the entire slide deck because, hey, this is how we make our money, right? You can go around and be the Earl Guru yourself. But if you need a PDF or a particular slide because you just want to steal that for a presentation you're doing internally, drop me a line and we'll chat about it and we'll send it to you.
Sounds great. Well, thanks, Earl. This has been terrific. I really appreciate your threading through this. It was really interesting to watch and to listen to. And thank the guests for joining in. There's some great questions. Again, this, as you mentioned, this is going to be up on our YouTube channel shortly. So if you had to get out for a moment and come back again, you'll be able to access what you missed. And And seriously, if you feel you like this a lot, feel free to share it with colleagues and friends who couldn't join us today live, right? If one final note, and Earl kind of did this in his closing, if you have any comments or like to talk to Earl or even one of our other practitioners or have ideas for a future webinar, reach out to us. You can use Earl's direct comment. You can use hello@Construx. You can use comments@construx.com. We would definitely like to hear from your thoughts. So on behalf of Earl and myself, thank you all for coming to listen to us today, and have a great day.